Hello and welcome to No Veto Video. I'm Carson.
And I'm Catherine, and it's good to have you guys along with us this week as we respond to The Big Sick from 2017, made for Amazon Studios, written by Emily Gordon and Kumail Nanjiani, directed by Michael Showalter, starring Kumail Nanjiani, Zoe Kazan, Holly Hunter, Ray Romano, and a host of others.
The Big Sick tells the true story of Kumail's attempt to make a break into stand-up comedy, as well as his interpersonal relationship issues with his immediate family, as well as his girlfriend, now wife, Emily.
So, I first heard about this movie on the podcast Pop Culture Happy Hour, where Kumail was a guest host, and they asked him to plug what he was working on, and he said, I have this movie that my wife and I have been writing together, so I'll be looking forward to it next year. And then sort of by bits and little, somebody had watched it maybe at a festival and talked about it on a podcast, and then somebody else. So it kind of picked up this steam in my awareness on the sort of fringes of my pop culture awareness. And we missed it in the theaters, which was sad for me. But then, of course, it came onto Amazon, and I was like, oh, well, this is what we should watch. And it was sort of a good weekend movie, I think.
I hadn't actually known much about this movie at all. The only times I really listened to Pop Culture Happy Hour with Catherine in the car.
And so in my other places you might have ran into Kumail Nanjiani. He does the Indoor Kids podcast with his wife, Emily Gordon, about video gaming. He also does the podcast The X-Files Files, where he's going through each episode of The X-Files, sort of 1 week at a time, or one episode at a time. He's on the HBO comedy Silicon Valley, and well, that's enough places for now. But none of those places are exactly like our home bases of pop culture. So yeah, the story kind of talks a bit about starting a career. It talks a bit about starting a relationship, and it also talks about sort of this inevitable friction that for him is sort of felt in the experience of being a Pakistani American whose Pakistani culture and American culture is kind of rubbing up against one another. And I think everybody kind of goes through, in their move toward adulthood, this rubbing of how much of the past do we hold on to, and how much do we let go of as we move forward into the relationships that we're going to be a part of. I wonder kind of what about that sort of kindled in you a response in this film?
Well, as you were saying, that we all have this kind of cultural baggage, even if our families have been in here for multiple generations in the U.S., we still have these traditions that are passed on, we're expected to carry on, or these heirlooms that we're expected to preserve, or just expectations from your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents. And I think it was even harder for him because his family came from a different culture into ours, and he's trying to adapt to the culture he mostly grew up in and spent all of his adult years in, versus the culture that his family was raised in. And I think there's this just big dynamic going on that's hard for them all to reconcile.
And it's hard to face, and so for the longest time the character tries to live uneasily in both worlds, sort of without integrating them within himself, and letting everybody else know that he's in this integration process at the same time. So that's it's one of the major conflict sort of threads of this film, and it gets a little, I don't want to say overshadowed because it actually is one of the major but it does sort of it takes a back seat for a while because real life intervenes, and that there's this unexpected illness that happens in the midst of that. And that's the way life is. So more generally, how was this movie for you?
I liked it. Some of it was extremely, like, cringy and painful to watch.
I was under the blankets for sections of this film.
And it wasn't just one character. Many of the characters were very cringy at times. I would like to think this was kind of an over-the-top portrayal just so we got the gist of it. But part of me also worries that maybe they were actually nicing it up a bit.
No, I think that is exactly the case, because I think there is this thing that we do in real life, which is that, I'm going to say a phrase that implies a very, very bad thing. I don't mean a bad thing, I just mean like a gradual process, which is that death by 1,000 cuts.
Oh, yeah.
Like that we, there's all of these little interactions, these micro frictions that occur within relationships that like happen over a long period of time, but for the action of a film have to be compressed and exaggerated so that you kind of get the same. So no, I don't think there was any one event that was just as bad as this. Although apparently Holly Hunter really did heckle somebody at the U.S. Open, so that happened. So that doesn't happen in the film, but it was the inspiration for part of the film.
Interesting.
So, I enjoyed this, but it might help to know that Judd Apatow, whose like byline is cringe comedy, was the executive producer for this film. So yeah, there were parts that were just terribly like, oh my god, make it stop. Oh, it's gonna keep going. Oh god, why did they say that? Oh no.
Now they're digging it deeper.
And as like at first I was relating to you because you were awkward, but then like the awkward people didn't stop in their awkwardness, and
yeah,
there was actually a lot to relate to, I thought, in this movie. I felt a lot of kinship with the characters as they kind of found their nerdy rhythm with each other, and even enjoying their own little episode of No Veto Video.
Yeah, I pointed that out in the film. At one point it seems a lot like No Veto Video. The nerd group you mentioned, even they had internal conflict, though.
So, Kumail is, at this point, a sort of struggling stand-up in the Chicago comedy scene, and he's surrounded by all of these fledgling comedians who are working on their bits and who are having difficult personalities. They kind of exist in this era of like, or in this space of like savage truth, but also like total cowardice, and how do those things kind of live together? It mostly means that like, to your face I say you're great, and then behind your back I shred you to pieces, and that's...
And they explicitly call that out at one point too.
Yeah, everybody knows what's happening. It's just how do they find their peace in that moment? So.
Going into this movie, I didn't know whether it was going to be based on real-life events, or it was presented to me by Catherine as a rom-com. So I was thinking maybe like Wedding Singer, or something in that vein, which, I mean, there's definitely elements of that, but I was expecting a either purely fictional account or a highly fictionalized account of real events.
I got fussed at in my department for giving away too much of the plot by saying it was the real life, telling of how Kumail Nanjiani and his wife Emily Gordon got together. So,
spoiler.
once burned, yeah.
Yeah.
I think though at this point that has been well documented in the media around this.
I was going to say it's kind of common knowledge.
It is common knowledge.
But yeah, I could see if you had already been and said, "Don't do this." Here
is the man and his wife wrote this movie, and
yeah,
the wife and her husband. I don't know. So
I thought it was an interesting look at the medical field too, and how it really is a science, and you, for people going through it and their families, it's really hard, but it really is a try something, look at the results. If you have positive results, keep doing it. If not, figure out why. And that can be really frustrating for someone when their child is in a coma.
Yeah, at one point, Kumail's trying to kind of self-soothe and to spread comfort where he can by saying, they know what they're doing. They're these are experts. They're doing their job. And the Holly Hunter character says, basically they don't know what they're doing. But she doesn't say that in a mean way or in an angry way, but just sort of like that they're doing the best with what they've got. And I thought that was a very nice way to talk about medicine. It's just to say, you've got people, you've got experts, or they've got experience and they've got knowledge and they've studied and they know kind of why sometimes things happen. But each individual case is completely different and totally different. And yeah, they're human beings who are trying their best with the information that they have available. And though at one point, her patience with that wears off, and she's not able to kind of hold that equanimity, and that happens too. Yeah.
So, was there anything else about did the medical portrayal feel realistic to you as someone that works in the medical field?
So here's what I think is important to kind of hold to one side, which is to say that this is a movie that was written by people who were at the bedside, who were family members, who were observers of the medical practice, which is an infinitely more traumatizing experience than to be the one in the lab coat.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, when, even as I work, in a sort of medicine adjacent capacity, if it were you who were sick, all of that would go right out the window. I mean, that's true when we have nurses and their family members come in and suddenly they're bewildered and lost and that sort of thing. So so there were times where I'm like, well, that would be a bedside procedure. That would be a no big deal. But in the movie, it's this is a huge deal, and there's massive complicating then it's very scary, and it's well, it's not scary to me, but it's not scary to me because it's not it's not my trauma.
Yeah.
Illness is traumatic, and not just for the person going through it. So yes, I have quibbles with it, and I'm trying to be a better audience member and not quibble with movies all the time around medicine. For one thing, not a doctor, so I don't know.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's also, I think, important to remember the perspective from which this movie's told.
Yeah.
And the perspective from which this movie's told is, I know very little, and everything that I'm experiencing is disconcerting and frightening. And
it keeps changing, the information that they're given.
Mm-hmm. There's this one montage that I think we should probably show everyone who works in a hospital, though, where the family's sitting and sort of just getting this drinking from the fire hydrant download of information from physicians, and the physicians then would go and write into their notes that they had discussed with the family and that the family understood, kind of everything that had been talked to them about. Maybe they understood the first physician, but by the third or fourth, they didn't understand anything. It was just the sea of noise and...
Oh, and there were 5 physicians, so...
Right? So I think there's this way in which it's good for us all to remember that sometimes, what is routine for us is not routine for someone else.
And it wasn't, by the end of it, it started as a montage, as you said, but by the end of it, we really didn't even see a face, and we just hear all of their voices layered, and you can't understand what anyone's saying. And I think they even added a little distortion to make it even harder to pick out what they're...
Yeah, sort of. So that's what really brings home the point of view of the film. I really like experiences as a movie goer when I get a moment like that, because that just really cements for me an experience that maybe I've had something similar to, but I'm not currently experiencing. But that can really bring me right into the world of the movie. Mm-hmm.
And you and I have both seen stand-up comedians live who were trying to make it big but really hadn't succeeded yet, and that comedy club felt pretty realistic.
It did. The sort of expectation and silence, and also oh, this person isn't quite there yet.
And, sometimes I'll say something like, are they serious? Should I laugh? Was this a joke? Is it a bad joke? Or is it, like, something really going on for them? Or is it a good joke and I just don't get it for some reason?
And I'm bad for crowd work. So, like, aspiring comedians who see me in your audience someday, like, don't pick me. I'm bad for crowd work because mostly I want to go just to watch and, like, to experience your comedy, but I don't want to interact with you. And, like, So, like, I think I actually would be, like, the ideal comedy club audience for Kumail, who wants no audience interaction. That's great. Like, if I don't even have to look at you, that's okay.
I forgot about that. We were at a comedy club once with actually someone who is really famous. We were in the front, and he did call on you for...
Like, he thought I wasn't laughing hard enough. And, like, I'm sorry, that just means that you're kind of bad at your job. Like, it's not my fault. But what was actually going on is that, like, I just maybe sometimes don't have a terribly expressive face. I struggled with this in theater classes in college, and it serves me well right now in my job to have a better sort of poker face. But no, it just means that I don't give maybe what he was looking for. Boy, I am still mad about that, and it happened like
15 years ago.
15 years ago. So yeah, don't call on me at your comedy act.
I'm not sure how Kumail actually managed to balance everything either. He was hiding his girlfriend from his family, hiding his family from his girlfriend, doing stand-up, trying to, like, juggle his roommate being around all the time, and driving for Uber. I don't think I could do all of that.
And not studying for the LSAT.
And not studying for the LSAT.
So yeah, there was a lot there.
Yeah.
And Emily too was balancing a lot. And there are things that she had to let go of, and I think that's the other thing that we don't think much about. She talks a little bit about how after her illness, there's still a lot of the expectation of how I will proceed forward from this event, and how it's not exactly being like that for her. And I think there's something rich and not exactly plumbed in this movie, but worth sort of still pondering, which is that idea of, like, do we change our expectations of someone who's been through even what we might call a life-altering event, as if, like, everything isn't a life-altering event. But on the other hand, this was a serious event, and it and did she come out of it with, like, brand new perspectives and everything had been changed over? No, but had things changed, and did it take some time to, like, sort out? Yeah. And I think that's part of the story of illness too, that we as a culture don't always get right either.
And actually, this was a common theme for many of the characters, whether or not the character was struggling with their own illness or other things in their life. Kumail had to let go of the parts of tradition he was still holding on to only for his parents, like going through the motions of, okay, I'll go to the prayer room and pray, even though he wasn't praying. He had to let go of some of the other traditions. His parents had to let go of the expectations they had on him. There was just a lot of... I don't want to say, like, everyone just changed who they were at the core, but they grew. They learned that not everything could be the way they wanted. Other people have their own lives, their own goals, their own choices to make.
Yeah, there's this, at the end, kind of an uneasy tension between sort of being formed by others and being formed sort of internally. and everybody kind of has that moment to go through, including Beth and Terry, Emily's parents, as portrayed in this film, are quite a bit different than apparently Emily Gordon's family actually is like. But they themselves are an important lens, I think, for the rest of the film. Like, that their tensions and their formation as a new family group wasn't easy either, even though they're both white, you know? The one's an Italian-American from New York, and one's... So Holly Hunter's character is nominally from North Carolina, or South Carolina, I forget where she says.
I think they said North.
Right, so she was studying at East Carolina, which is in North Carolina. Carolinas, you know, work yourselves out, all right? But you know that there is this idea of like, even though we might look similar, it's not easy to form a relationship. And then I come back to that. The Kumail's brother, Naveed, who's played by Adil Akhtar, has this great moment where they're like gonna go practice batting, but even how he swings a bat looks like a cricket swing. Like, did you notice that? It doesn't work well. Like, even though he's in his Cubby uniform, like his Cubby jersey and hat, and they talk about, you know, his own marriage was arranged and it was awkward, but that they formed this new family group, and that the parents, Asmat and Sharim, they were an arranged marriage and it was awkward, and they had their own sort of adjustment process into becoming the couple that they are, and the movie doesn't ultimately make us choose, and I like that very much. That it's not. It says, you know, this is what works for some, and it doesn't have to work for all. But just because it doesn't work for all doesn't, you know, mean that it's not allowed to work for the people it's working. It's gotten a circular sentence there, but I think you guys get the point. So that's what I liked about this film, that there was this sort of gentleness, even with the characters that ultimately the main characters end up disagreeing with, as far as how they're treated.
So is there anything else that you thought was important to note in this film?
Let's see. I always like it when I can put a finger on architecture, that this is filmed in Chicago, which is a city that we live fairly close to. And we also live in the burbs, and we understand the difference, and as they talk about in this movie. It's nice to see Chicago. It's nice to see, you know, Upper Wacker and all the beautiful architecture of Chicago. It was a nice looking film.
And the pier.
All right, so any last thoughts from you?
I noticed it was kind of weird. Kumail's character, I don't know if this was something that Kumail actually did in real life, but the portrayal, he was hanging on to things early on in the movie. I don't want to give too much away, but then later he shifted when Emily woke up from the coma to showing her what he was now hanging on to. And it's interesting, the kind of shift in, like, he's still holding on to things in possibly an unhealthy way, but it's a different direction.
I think that was... I took that part of the film as more metaphorical than literally hanging on to, but
that's... yeah.
But yeah... What we hold on to, what we turn loose of. This is, you know, actually that makes me think there was a sign in they keep sticking this family in the bereavement room when they need to have a meeting with physicians, which is hilarious, and also makes me a little jealous. Like, I don't have a room like that. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is, there's at one point they kind of pan across the room, and there's a sign that says, "Grief is love's way of not letting go." So as we talk about sort of the themes around holding on to and letting go of, that maybe the movie was aware of that as a theme and sort of incorporating that into the production design. Good catch.
So if you've enjoyed this episode, or if you've hated it, please let us know down in the comments, or in the comments over at novitovideo.com. There you can find news and information on upcoming special events.
And also back episodes, including several, I guess more than a month now ago, when we talked about The Big Short, not to be confused with The Big Sick. So, there you go. All right.
A lot of big S things.
Big S things. So the big S thing that we're going to do right now, so yeah, it was a
segue.
Bad segue. The thing that we're going to do right now is talk about our overrides for the week. Override in politics is when a veto gets overturned. Here we use it as a way to talk about other films that we might recommend as partners to or in place of this movie. So, Carson, what's your override recommendation this week?
It's doing very different things, but while you were sleeping, also nominally anyway, a rom-com. It's kind of the reverse of this plot-wise.
In some ways. It has a good tie-in. In fact, this film, I think, was at one point going to be titled While You Were Comatose.
Huh.
That's in the end credits. I'm not sure, maybe it's the book that they wrote this around. It's also set in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. Yeah, good pick.
Thank you. And what is yours?
So mine is actually still in theaters, so you can go out and check that out. It's Coco, the new Pixar film. I thought you might pick While You Were Sleeping, so so While You're Sleeping kind of takes the it's a fictional account long before this actually happened, but sort of the plot structure of this movie. Coco kind of plays with some of the themes, especially that Carson and I were just talking about, and yeah, it's out in first run release right now, so enjoy that.
Mm-hmm. And it's a very good movie. You should definitely see it.
We enjoyed it very much. Big Sick made me cry, and Coco made me cry for many of the same reasons. So,
the next time on No Veto Video, we'll be discussing These Final Hours from 2014.
Where can the good people find it?
They can find this on Netflix.
All right. These Final Hours available on Netflix. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. We've enjoyed being with you guys. Again, feel free to shoot us a comment. Definitely hit that subscribe button if you're a new viewer, and we certainly have back episodes for you to catch up on. And we will see you again soon.
Until next time, goodbye.